Motivation and self-regulated learning. We pretty much want kids to be self-regulated learners. Self-regulated learners is closely related to students' goals. So when kids start to do self-regulated learning, it's learning that results from students' self-generated thoughts and behaviors that are systematically oriented towards the attainment of their learning goals. The problem is a lot of kids don't set learning goals, especially children who come from poverty, because we're going to talk about this. They don't have a future time orientation, so they don't think into the future. Most of you have went to college. You didn't think about if you were going to college. You thought about where you were going to college. The question wasn't if, it was where. For a lot of children in poverty, the question is if, not where. So it's changing that mindset and doing those future planning that really helps. Ron Clark works a lot with inner city kids and kids that come from high poverty areas. And first thing he does in about 5th grade is he sets up the plan of where they're going to college and starts to do that long-term planning with their parents and with the child. So highly motivated students plan their learning. They know what the next step is going to be. And then they take steps to carry out that plan. They'll sit down, they plan out what classes they need to take, they know what the plan is. By the way, our education majors, a lot of times that's the best thing that they can do. I will sit down with them and plan out all 4 years of their college. So every semester they pretty much know what's coming and they know what the next step is going to be. A lot of other departments don't necessarily do that, but it's not a bad idea to sit down with your advisor and kind of plan it out. Even if you decide to change your major, it's okay. You just switch plans. And that helps you retain the information because you have a future goal in mind. Matter of fact, any of you seniors, the problem that you have, like I had at least in my senior year too, it was like, okay, I've attained my undergraduate degree and now I'm going to be a teacher. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. What's my plan? Like I wanted God to send me down a blueprint. I'm really good at following plans. Just send me down one. And I was talking to one of my professors and he's like, where do you imagine yourself in 5 years? And I looked at him and I said, I always thought I was going to be a medical doctor when I was younger because I worked in that field for a while and stuff like that. And it was just something that really interested me. But a lot of life turns, different things that happen. I also was really interested in special ed. Anyway, a lot of different life turns that happened and I ended up going into education. And I love being a special ed teacher. And he said, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I'm like, well, I definitely see myself getting a master's, I wanted to become like maybe a therapist, like some kind of a therapist. I'm like, maybe go back to grad school and become a therapist. And he's like, okay, well, do me one favor. And I said, what? He said, promise me you'll teach for at least 5 years before you go back to grad school. You need to have some more life experience. And I thought, okay. So he kind of put this little bug in my ear that I had a plan then. And so I had this long-term goal of what I was going to do. I actually ran into that guy at a conference when I was in grad school, and I had taught 5 years before I went back to grad school. And I went back for emotional disturbance and psychology. And he said to me I said to him, hey, guess what? And he said, what? I said, I finished my 5th year teaching before I went into grad school. But I had this long-term plan. And so you have to start thinking about that because that goal setting and then the monitoring of yourself and giving yourself feedback really helps you maintain because you have this goal in mind and this obtainment in mind. And so we know that some of the sources of student motivation is that idea of social modeling. That kids learn from other people, that they evaluate themselves and their efforts based on this idea of social modeling. It says that self-regulated learning is not the same as achievement motivation, which we're going to talk about in a minute. It's generally because self-regulated learners require that the learners take independent responsibility for learning, not to simply comply with the teacher's demands. So the source of the student's motivation comes from feedback. It comes from goal setting. It comes from their comparison to how they're doing and the social modeling that they get. It's not necessarily from the grades or from anything else that goes along with it. So teachers' development and engagement and investment in learning leads to self-regulated learners. So if you teach kids how to goal set, if you give them feedback, if you invest in their learning goals and talk to them about their learning goals, then children learn to be self-regulated learners. Another theory that comes along with motivation is the expectancy theory, and it's M times PS times incentive, a value of success. Or if we look at it, it's the expectancy variance model, and it says it is the perceived probability of success, which is PS, and the value they place on the success, which is the incentive value, which is the IS. So one of the things that they look for is if you think you're going to be successful and you think that this is worthy, then you're going to be successful. We kind of talked about this already, that there are some kids that do really well in classes that they're interested in and they think they're going to do well in. So then you'll be successful. However, there's a little bit of in expectancy theory, there's some problems with it. Overly high probability of success can be detrimental to motivation. So if you think that you're going to be really that you think, oh, this is so easy, I don't care, this is really, really easy and I don't have to put any effort in, then even if you have good incentive for it, it really actually lowers your incentive for it. The example your book uses is about a tennis player. If you play somebody in tennis who is better than you or just a slightly better or equal to you, you tend to do better. It will increase your motivation to do well. However, if you're really good in tennis, and because your perceived probability of success isn't really high, it's just kind of there. You think you can be successful, but you're not positive you can be successful. However, if you are sure you're going to be successful, you're playing the crappiest kid on the team, then you usually don't play your best. You will actually go in there and you will just kind of give it a half-hearted try because you only have to put in half the effort in order to beat this student. Now, you could take the other student who has this perceived probability of failure, and so they're playing the best kid on the team. And so they might try hard because they really want to beat that kid, but the likelihood that they're going to beat them is low. So they're going to try, but they're maybe not try as hard as they would if they were playing somebody just slightly better than them, because the perceived probability of success would be higher with that kids. So the student's belief of oneself and the value of the academic success equals success. So you have to have both. And what this really means for teachers is that when we look at expectancy theory, is the thing you really want to take away from it is the most important implication of expectancy theory is that the common sense proposition that the task for the student should be neither too easy or too difficult. So you want to raise that bar so that they're jumping to grab it, but you don't want to make it so high that they're going to have to use a springboard to get it, because you want to make sure that it's obtainable to them. So it has to be not too easy and not too hard. It's kind of like the three bears, Goldilocks and the bear, three bears. Yeah, isn't that what it is? You want to have a bed that's not too hard and not too soft. It's got to be just right. So the expectancy variance model talks about that the children's belief that in themselves is that like their perceived belief in their probability of success has to be just right. It can't be so hard that they're like, I'm never going to learn this, and it can't be too easy that they're that they know that they don't have to put much effort into it. The next one that they talk about is achievement theory. Motivation and achievement theory, or achievement motivation, is a generalized tendency to strive for success and to choose goal-oriented success and failure activities. So given a choice of work partners for a complex task, achievement-motivated students tend to choose partners who are good at the task. And so you can be either an achievement-motivated person or you can be an affiliation-motivated person. Affiliation-motivated students tend to choose children or choose partners who are friendly. And they really care more about the social aspect of it than they do the achievement aspect of it. So achievement motivation strives for success and selects success and failure activities, or they will select activities that they will be successful in, or they will select partners with whom they will be successful. And if they're early in their early years of school, achievement motivation is often affected by family experience. They might want to please their family, or their family might talk about them being good at something, and they get excited about that kind of stuff. So achievement oriented or achievement motivated students tend to do that based on their experiences from home. However, in the upper grades, when we look at kids that have moved away from their parents and are looking more for peers, success and motivation can cause each other. Because what you want when you build achievement motivation, it's nothing breeds success like success. A kid who continues to fail, that's why we talk about achievement motivation with failure. If a kid continues to fail over and over and over again, they just start to believe that they're going to be a failure. And it doesn't matter. Like, you can tell them that they're going to be successful, and they will just keep doing, like, no, I never am. I'm not good at math. I'm not good at this. And it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They just keep failing. That's why it's so important when you're working with kids who have that achievement motivation in a failure sense, when they think of themselves as a failure, that you have to build these small successes. I used to actually make books for my students that were things that they did well on, or that they struggled with at first and then they conquered. And that I would make them, whenever they would tell me I can't or something like that, or I'm not good at anything, they would have to pull that book out and they'd have to look through it to see all the things that they had succeeded in. So when we talk about motivation and we talk about goal orientation, I've talked about this already a little bit. Learning oriented students, kids who are learning oriented, they're motivated by desire for knowledge acquisition and self-improvement. I really tried really hard to make sure that my children were kind of like this. There's characteristics of being a self-regulated learner. They're intrinsic. They're really not very competitive. It's about knowledge and knowledge itself. My son, actually, he ended up he was salutatorian, but up for valedictorian. But up until probably about 10th grade or 11th grade, he really didn't care. And the reason I say that is like, he really had no desire to be valedictorian. It was probably only because this girl who wanted to be valedictorian and ended up being valedictorian, she would like really be nasty to him. Like, she would say things like, I hope you got a B. And if he got an A or beat her in class, she would go, and she would get really mad. And then some of the teachers said things like, well, I know who the valedictorian in our class is more than likely to be. This was like in 10th grade. And one teacher said, it's probably going to be Logan or Hope. And so my son was pretty smart, and he was like, really? I can beat them. So that was kind of that. He was competitive in the sense that it kind of made him mad that this teacher was doing that. And so these really highly competitive kids, because they were performance oriented students, they kind of dragged him into it, I would say. Now, in the long run, he ended up not being valedictorian, but the reason more likely is because that other girl who was behind him, she actually ended up taking night classes or online classes at Daytona State to increase her GPA. So that's why I said it's kind of funny that he just failed. Well, he didn't fail; he got a D. This Calc 3, because, like I said, academics has come really easy to him. But our entire life, it's always been, my parents were like this as well. It was never really about the grade, even though I knew they could get good grades. It was always about the learning experience. Even for my son when he was little, he'd say, Mommy, what do you want? And I would say, I want you to lose a point. He'd go, why? Why would anybody want to lose a point? That'd be bad. I'd say, just because sometimes being bad's fun. To know that failure's a good thing. It's okay. You don't have to be good at everything, but as long as you learn from it, that's all I'm asking of you. And they tend to be really resilient. Now, performance-oriented students are motivated by desire to gain recognition from others and earn good grades. And it can be discouraged. They focus on getting good grades. Sometimes they'll take easy courses, or they'll try and cut. A lot of performance-oriented kids will cheat. They would rather cheat to get a good grade than they would to learn something. And they tend to avoid challenges. Things that are really, really hard, they wouldn't take because that might, hurt their grade point average, or it might do something. Kids who are learning-oriented kids will just take it because they want to learn it. They might take a class just to take a class. Now, children can slip in and out of learning-oriented and performance-oriented. And the sad part, this is what my daughter told me the other day, that I think teachers and schools and I think universities kind of play on this, that we tend to look for performance-oriented kids instead of learning-oriented kids. Some of your B students are going to be much more, or your 2.8 students are going to be much more successful in life than are your performance-oriented students. Matter of fact, one of the people, if you've ever been to the Hollis Center, Mr. Hollis, who's passed now, he said one time, you should be really nice to your C students because they're going to come back and they're going to endow your scholarships and build your buildings. And he says, be nice to your A students because they're going to be your professors. Because they find that, being an A student and being a professor means that you come back and, you do what you were good at, and you were good at school. So teacher expectations and achievements are really important. We talk about this, a self-fulfilling prophecy already a little bit. Students live up or live down to teacher expectations. So you have to communicate positive expectations. You have to talk to kids about it. If you talk to kids about them not being good, they're not going to be good. My daughter has a really hard time with her Spanish teacher right now because in one day she'll say things to her like, and my daughter has had some serious medical issues. She had a tumor in her spine and she was paralyzed for like 3 months in 10th grade. And then 11th grade, she went through some severe depression because the tumor grew back. And it's been kind of rough for her. But the one teacher one time said to her, we've been to the teachers and talked to them about what she's going through and, some of the struggles that she's had because she was on morphine and stuff and had to go off drug addiction and stuff like that because of the pain that she was in. But the teacher one time said to her, Kenna, what makes you special? Why do you have to be so special? Why do you think you can hand in stuff late? Well, she was special because she has a severe medical, and she was just devastated. I mean, she was just devastated in class because, when you take the time to work with your teachers and let them in on this secret of your life that, of everything that you've went through and some of the trials and tribulations you've went through, and then to have the teacher just dismiss them and call you out in front of your class. And then she said, you're just never going to get it. And, so then she started to believe that she was never going to get it. She has a couple other teachers during the same time that worked with her and told her how much they believed in her and, would bring her in after school and stuff. And she just loves those teachers and she soared in those classes. In Spanish, she continues to struggle with Spanish. So you got to communicate positive expectations. And then one minute that will be one day and then the next day she's like, well, I think you'll do fine. But you can't wishy-wash like that. You kind of believe in those kids every day. We already talked about wait time, utilizing that wait time, giving kids time to think about it because that communicates high expectations. You're not going, oh, I can't believe you didn't get this. You're saying things like, okay, I know you know this. I'm going to wait for it. Keep assessments and test results private, that you don't have to go around and broadcast everybody who did the best on the test and all that kind of stuff. If they want to share that, they'll share it. Because it's about them getting better. It's not about who got the best score. And then you want to guard against bias and you want to treat each kid equally. And one of the things that you want to do is start each day fresh. Even if that kid gave you hell yesterday, you want to do it treat them with the next day is a fresh day. Every day is a fresh day. Because anxiety achievement is really, really high. Anxiety is a constant companion of education, especially now with, getting into colleges is really hard. And, you have all that kind of pressure. You got the pressure of taking the 3rd grade test. You got your end of course exams. You got your ACT, your SAT. So fear of failure, failing at some of this stuff or not feeling good about it, plus loss of self-esteem, can really, really hinder motivation because kids start to think that they are as good as whatever that grade on that test is. I got worried about my daughter when she was going through depression and her grade suffered and, the tumor grew back and I was worried about the tumor and the pain coming back and her having to be paralyzed again and all that kind of stuff. And I was really worried about it. But one day she looked at me and she said, Mom, is it bad that even though I'm not doing well in school right now, I know I'm going to be successful when I get a job and in my life? And I was so relieved. And I said, no, honey, that's fine. Because school is about learning. It's not about the grade. And as long as she's learning, and believe me, she learned a lot of life lessons that none of you all learned. As long as she's learning and she knows, she's the strongest, bravest woman I know. And as long as I know that she's doing that, I pride her. Difficulty in tasks, affective anxiety. How difficult is it? How would you like to, she said she stayed in the hardest program there was, and she was having to take 20 milligrams of morphine twice a day, and then she was taking hydrocodone every 4 hours. So she was pretty much higher than a kite most of her 10th grade, half of her 10th grade year, and part of her almost into her 11th. And I always say that, yeah, that's difficult. And she wouldn't drop out of IB. She refused because she said she wasn't going to let this disease or disability hinder her. When you have anxiety, you have difficulty in learning. You will forget. Your brain overloads with cortisol, and it overloads your hippocampus and actually eats away at your hippocampus. And your hippocampus is kind of like the switchboard of learning. So when kids have anxiety, they actually don't remember as much. So that makes it difficult to transfer knowledge because you're not storing things in the long-term memory, and you're not actually making connections. And then they become self-conscious about their performance settings. They start to doubt what they're doing and doubt what they know. A lot of kids develop like math anxiety and stuff like that goes along with that because they don't feel that they're good at it. Girls develop more math anxiety than guys do, and guys develop more reading anxiety. And there's some research that suggests, when we went back to the chapter on brain and brain differences, because guys are able to mentally rotate objects in their brain, they're able to actually mentally count and stuff like that with and use counters in their head much more easily than girls are. And so they get mental math earlier. So guys grew up believing that they're better in math. It's not that they really are. It's just they, at a younger age, they were good at it. So girls, some people think get that anxiety at an earlier stage. And then guys, a lot of times, because they're not quite as adept in language at an earlier age, might look over at the little girl in kindergarten who's reading like War and Peace, and then they start thinking that they're not as good in reading. So a lot of guys kind of push that back, and they have anxiety over the idea of reading a lot. That goes along with it. Not everyone, but some. So that brings us along to intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, and this goes back to the behaviorism stuff that we talked about. Intrinsic incentives that we can use. Some people enjoy and therefore find things motivating and fulfilling. Like, I can computer program. I know how to use like C++ and some other stuff that goes along JavaScript. One of the things that's weird about that, intrinsic incentives, is I will do it and I get like sucked into it, and I'll be up for like 20 hours. And that's why I would never be a programmer. Because my brain just keeps wanting to solve it. I get into disequilibrium and I have to solve why the program's not working. So it's something, and I don't even know if I enjoy it. I just find it motivating. And then when I do solve it, it's like, I get that release, kind of like, oh my God, I figured it out. I have another friend of mine that does that with math problems. He'll work like 36 hours on one math problem. And I'm like, really? So it's something you enjoy and you find it motivating and fulfilling. Future time perspective, we already talked about this a little bit. Completing things might bring benefit in the future, and it can delay the reward. That if you have this future time perspective, you sometimes realize that what you're doing now is going to let you do something that you want to do later. And students with intrinsic motivation want to learn without any incentives. Matter of fact, you wouldn't have to pay them to do it. They just do it because they enjoy doing it. Extrinsic incentives, the reward is external to the activity, necessary when material is not intrinsically interesting, like grades, praise, and other rewards. Your book talks about the marker experiment with little kids, and one of the things they did was they gave kids markers to color. And all the kids wanted to color because they wanted to use the markers. They're all excited. There's preschool kids. And then one group of kids, they told them that they were going to give them a reward if they finished a picture for a stranger, for somebody that was coming in. The other group of kids, they only gave rewards to some kids, and they praised the kids for the effort that they did and the work that they did. And then the third group of kids, they didn't give any reward to. The kids that they didn't give any reward to ended up drawing more than the kids who they gave rewards to. It was actually not statistically difference between the ones that they gave the praise ones, like that they really picked out the ones that were really good. But the kids who everybody got a reward actually didn't do as well as the kids who got no reward. Because the reward was the being able to draw with these cool markers. It was intrinsically motivating without having to be rewarded for it. So sometimes when we reward kids for things that they already find interesting, all we do is kill their motivation. But sometimes you have to do it when it's not intrinsically motivating. And grades and praise and other rewards are already motivating enough. So teachers should be realistic and try to make learning intrinsically satisfying. Like, try and tap into the things that the kids are excited about. Dr. Hines said the other day, I went into I think it was a second grade class or third grade class. Anyway, the kids were reading about crocheting. And she said, how many kids want to read about crocheting? No wonder why kids hate reading. So you want to kind of make what they're reading about intrinsically satisfying, or what they're doing, but should not refrain from using extrinsic rewards if they're absolutely necessary. Some kids are going to have that fear of failure, or you're going to need to give them a little extra push that goes along with it. So when we look at this, avoid promising external rewards for activities that are already intrinsically interesting. Intrinsic motivation generally declines from early elementary school through secondary school. So in early elementary school, sometimes it's good to wave, to wave the little treat there, but once they learn it, then they're fine by secondary school. Reward should be contingent on the quality of the performance rather than the participation in the activity. So you're going to reward them for getting an A, or you're going to reward them for their effort if they study for 5 hours. And then strategic use of both intrinsic and extrinsic motivators is necessary for most learning situations. Principles for providing extrinsic incentives to learners: express clear expectations. So students should know explicitly what you expect them to learn. Provide frequent and immediate and clear feedback. When I did this study about what was the highest reward for schools, we went all around the state of Florida, and we interviewed kids about what was, when we were looking for extrinsic motivators or rewards, what was the number one reward? Number one reward was spending time with teacher. Number two was getting their papers back on time. Things like cookies or candy or Tootsie Rolls or all that kind of stuff, those were the farthest down on the list that you could get if you ranked them 1 to 10. With number one being spending time with their teacher. So specific praise, questions, quizzes, asking questions so that kids know immediately how they're doing. Increase the value and availability of extrinsic motivators. Reward and emphasize effort and progress improvement over time. So like portfolios. So you'll get 5 points. You don't get 20 points if you get it right the first time. You also get 20 points for how much time you spent on it. Teach students to praise themselves and pat themselves on the back. Using praise effectively is really important. The purpose of praise is to reinforce the behavior, and praise is equals love, so it's a primary reinforcer. Provide feedback to students on what they are doing right. Praise is effective when it's contingent on whatever they're doing, it's specific, and it's credible. I call some praise saccharine. Those teachers that, oh my God, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And you're looking at it and you're like, not really. It's neither too easy or too difficult to obtain. My music students always used to tell me when Dr. Adams was the band director, that when he praised you, you walked on cloud 9 for 2 weeks, because his praise was so sought after, but it was rare. My son talks about that with the art teacher, that when you have your art on the wall of fame in Mr. Carson's room, that meant something. He didn't just put everybody's art up there. It really meant something when it was there. So it's not too easy, but it's not too difficult. You can make it up there, but just recently my daughter did these really graphic art pieces about slut shaming and stuff like that. They were really good. And he said to her, okay, Kendall, I would hang these on the wall of fame, but I'm afraid it might, I'm afraid the principal might call me down because parents might complain, because they were pretty bold. They made a bold political statement. So you want to make sure your praise is genuine and it is credible, and that it's specific, and that you give it to them when it's needed, not 10 days later, okay, this was really good and this is why it was really good. And you have to teach them the praisers themselves and do that growth mindset. And that is the end of chapter 10.